Right now, we want to talk about a new study which shows the top 10 climate disasters of 2024. And this study points to these top 10 disasters killing 2,000 people and cost the world billions of dollars, $229 billion. This report from Christian Aid also shows the estimates are based only on insured losses, meaning the true financial costs are likely to be way higher, while the human costs are often simply uncounted.
To learn more about this, we're joined by Anabela Bonada, Managing Director of Climate Science in TAC Center on Climate Adaptation, University of Waterloo. Anabela, good morning.
Good morning.
So what's your reaction to this overwhelming data, the lost lives, the billions of dollars? What should we be taking away from this?
I'm absolutely saddened, but I'm not surprised. For Canada alone, before the end of 2024, so even a couple of months ago, we had reached our top insured losses at $8.1 billion. We had never seen a number like that for Canada until this year. So I kind of had the expectation that globally we'd be seeing something similar. And year after year, more and more people are dying from global events, especially extreme heat, which is the hardest to track and really know how many people are dying from it. And even when it is tracked, it's thousands of people. So unfortunately, I'm not surprised by this, but I'm still equally saddened each year when I hear these tremendous numbers come through.
Now, the U.S. bore much of the brunt of this top 10 list with 4 of the top 10 events. So the list points to U.S. storms for the whole year, which cost over $60 billion. And then Hurricane Milton in October, another $60 billion. And then Hurricane Helene, which affected the U.S., Mexico, and Cuba in September, $55 billion. And then Hurricane Beryl in July, which affected U.S., Mexico, and the Caribbean islands to the tune of $6.7 billion. So, is the U.S., and I realize this is kind of maybe a silly question, but is the U.S. under some sort of climate siege?
It's not a silly question at all. It's from graphically where it's located, how large it is, how many people live there, and the amount of infrastructure. So as the report mentioned, these are insured losses, which means the U.S. has insurance. So some countries don't have insurance, so we're not really tracking losses. And it has a lot of very expensive infrastructure, whether it's, roads, bridges, railway, hospitals. And when that gets destroyed and that number is tracked, it's major and it's huge for the U.S. The U.S. is exposed, though, to everything that you mentioned, from extreme heat, flooding, wildfire, convective storms. So it's going to feel the brunt of this a little bit more than other countries, but it's just more trackable in the U.S. than it is for some of our developing countries, for example.
So when you look at the U.S., and I don't want to pick on any particular part of the globe or any part of the United States, but Florida is just such a glaring example in a lot of cases when you talk about insured losses. Getting insurance in that part of the world is becoming increasingly challenging for those who live there. Yet people are moving there by the thousands every single day. At what point do we get the crossroads of people looking around and going, well, I can buy this house, but it's going to cost me just as much every month to insure it as it is to pay the mortgage? At what point are people going to give where they live a second thought based on not only the expense but the risk that they're at in terms of these disasters?
I think as long as people can get insurance, they're kind of willing to continue to pay higher and higher premiums based on their very high risk. It's when insurance companies start to pull out. So as you mentioned, some parts of Florida are uninsurable. And so that's when people kind of wake up to it and think, wait, now my biggest investment, which is my home, my property, my weekend location, it's no longer insured. If I want to sell it, will anybody buy it from me? So I think that's when people really start to get worried, and they might expect the government to pay out if something occurs. But for example, here in Canada, if something were to occur to your home and it's uninsured and the government pays you out, they won't do it a second time. So if you rebuild on a coast that flooded and your home was destroyed, nobody will save you after that, not an insurance company, not the government. So I do hope that people start paying more attention and start living away from our highest risk areas, because in part, our problem is climate change. It's an enormous part of our problem, But we have a lot to do with it on the development side. We keep building on our very, very high-risk areas, such as the coast of Florida. Miami itself is a city that could be underwater very soon, and people continue to build there and live there. So we really need to be responsible and take conscience for the decisions that we're making.
Now, you mentioned government, and one of the things that this report highlights is saying that pointing to politicians who downplay the urgency of the climate crisis only to serve to harm their own people. So what can our world leaders do to help?
Think longer term. I think the biggest issue with our world leaders is that they think within the 3, 4, 2 years that they will be in office. That's only harming their societies. So our governments need to start governing for people instead of for industry, for them becoming richer, whatever it is that they're looking for. And this is global. Some countries have very, corrupt governments. Others are not as corrupt, but they're only thinking in the short term. So think long term and actually govern for what the people want and the people need. And when they start looking at the long term, then they'll realize we need to really change course. And by changing course and doing things better, whether it's through reducing emissions or adapting better our societies, there will be huge savings. But it's just so hard for them to see that in the short term. It's costing us so much more money to not prepare for the impacts that we're feeling from climate change and will continue to experience.
So whether you believe that man created the climate change or not, or whether you believe that we can fix it or not, the truth is things are happening in unprecedented fashions in certain parts of the world. Fair to say, Anabela?
Absolutely. So whatever your belief is, which of course I stand on the side of science, and I truly believe the thousands of scientists that say climate change is happening. If you think it's something else causing it, you're still feeling the impacts,
right,
and you're seeing it in your neighbors and other countries, but it could happen to you. I don't want to scare people. The idea is prepare, think ahead of time, prepare your home, because flooding, for example, in Canada can occur practically anywhere. So just start to prepare ahead of time. We're feeling the impacts, and they're unprecedented.
So when insurance companies take action, Canada's a great example. Overland flooding insurance is tough to get, as you mentioned, in just about every part of Canada, right?
Yeah, so I'm not totally familiar what kind of insurance you can get where. So I do encourage people to look at their insurance. I know some people, for example, that are eligible for some type of flood insurance might not even have it. So take a look at your insurance, see what you're eligible for, speak to your brokers, and do reconsider when you see development occurring in a certain area and you want to buy there or where you're going to buy next, because some homes might become uninsured in the future. And currently, 10% of homes, which is about 1.5 million in Canada, are uninsurable just because they're so high risk.
Yeah, and that's sort of, I wanted to dovetail it all in together, right? It's like, I know guys that do sports gambling, and they can't believe how Vegas gets it right so often. And when the insurance companies are telling you that this is impractical, there's a reason for that.
I would listen because they're in the business of, we don't want risk. We want to take risk out of the system as much as possible. So I'd be paying attention to what insurance companies are saying and doing, and consider yourself and where you should be buying or building and protecting yourself based on that data.
Now, in terms of, you talked about climate change and that you stand on the side of scientists and of science. What do you say to those who say, and this is something that we hear here, and I think I've even made the joke before, we're like, well, if climate change means winter isn't quite as cold, I'm okay with climate change.
I think because we live in Canada, we all love to have a warmer than normal winter every once in a while. But we're losing a little bit of our cultural side, going for sledding or having that snowball fight when we were all little. My kids haven't had that at all so far this winter. And I do want that for them. So in a way, don't get so happy because it's not normal and it starts to affect other things that we might not see. So it leads to drought in Canada. And as soon as we start to experience drought, then we need to get worried about our freshwater systems and how much water we have available, and our neighbors in the south, the U.S., who might also run out of water and they think We have lots up here, so it could be a concern in the future. So I don't think it's that good for us if we have milder winters, less snow, and less rain occur. We really need that to keep our Canada the way that it's supposed to be.
Anabela Bonada, thank you so much for joining us today. We really appreciate your time and your insight.
Thank you so much for having me.